So it's my pleasure to introduce Ryan Radon, who many of you know better as Kaskade. New York Times called him the new face of electronic dance music. He's been called America's #1 DJ by the DJ Times and Pioneer DJ. He's also Grammy nominated. But you know, I kind of just know him as someone who consistently delivers quality, both in the studio on his records and in live performance. So without further ado, let's welcome Kaskade. Give it up.
Thank you.
So welcome back to Atlanta.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, you guys. It's cool to be here and talk to you today.
So if you didn't know, Kaskade has an album coming out tomorrow, is it?
Yes, tomorrow. Automatic comes out tomorrow. I've been on Twitter and Facebook like all day leading into this. Like, it's coming out tomorrow. So, yes.
It's called Automatic, and is it your 9th studio album at this point? Or?
It is. Does that age me? It's cool that I'm telling you guys that because I'm sure you guys can understand. But yeah, sometimes when I'm talking to these young kids, I'm like, it's my 9th album. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, 9th studio. That's hard for me to say. Wow.
I think it's really cool considering that like the current dance climate, a lot of artists, you know, gravitate towards just putting out singles or EPs, and maybe just talk a little bit about why the album format has such a draw and an appeal to you.
Yeah, and I realize when I say that in electronic music, for those of you who aren't super familiar with the genre, it moves really fast. It's mainly singles driven. It's very aimed at that specific moment that the DJ would play at 1:30 in the morning. So it's very focused that way. But for me, early on in my career, when I sat down to write a record, of course, when I was a young kid, I had that same mentality. I sat down in the studio and I was like, all right, man, I got to make something that I want to play at peak time. That'll get my name out there. But every time I sat down to write, or when I was just working late at night in the studio, a lot of times these more mellow or quieter moments would happen. And I still like them equally as much. I'm like, oh man, this is a cool piece of music. I'm really proud of it. It might not necessarily be something that I play, you know, in the middle of my set to make everyone go crazy, but I think there'll be other people out there that'll appreciate this moment. So when I got set to make my first record, and I was preparing that, and I was kind of collecting all the tracks that I'd worked on, there was a handful of those moments, and it made for a great collection. It made for a solid album. It had peaks and valleys, and it had a theme, and it had a real feel to it. And for me, that worked. So instead of aiming at a single and trying to just put out, you know, every quarter I'm going to put out a single and try and get that one hot song, that mentality didn't work for me. I always felt like there was too much pressure when I sat down to write. So for me, it was like, okay, I'll sit down and work in the studio, and what happens, happens. You know, maybe it's a quiet moment, maybe it's a really loud moment. And then I'll put those things together and it'll be an album. And I seem to write better and work better that way. Just things come out easier that way. So that's why I've always been focused on the record, because then I don't have to think about that one moment. I don't have to think about the single. I just let things naturally happen.
Sure. The one thing that when I saw the track list, I was a little sad not to see you resuming vocal duties on the album. How do you decide which artists to work with on which songs?
Actually, I do sing on this one, on the opening track, We Don't Stop. I didn't list myself as a singer because I was like, Kaskade featuring Kaskade. I thought that was always a little strange. So I do sing on this record, but how do I decide? Typically, I write the song and I reach out to friends, just people that I know or people's voices that I'm familiar with. Now in my life, later, after I've written more material, I've realized it's better to start out writing something with somebody in mind who can sing that. because then it's not such a hard search afterwards. Because sometimes I write something and I'm like, oh, I don't know who's going to sing this, and I have to try 2 or 3 different people out before I get something that I'm really happy with. But it's taken me a long time to realize that and to come to these conclusions and you know, iron out the workflow a little bit. But usually it's just, I mean, for a long time in my career, there wasn't much money in dance music, so everyone I was working with or collaborating with or writing with, these were all just, I mean, literally neighbors or people's studios that I lived next to, or, you know, all these, it was just friends. It was a very natural process. I reached out to people that I knew or people that were independent also and looking to work with somebody that were also hungry. So it was a very natural process in the beginning. Now, it's easier. Dance music's popular. Some people, when I call them, recognize my name, and hopefully they return the call. So it's easier to get features and to find people that are willing to work with me. But it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't like that for the majority of my career. That's a recent thing.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about the creative process on the album and maybe how it differed from Atmosphere, if it did. What did you know, this body of work represent for you?
Yeah, I can talk for a little bit about that. I'll take it back even before Atmosphere, just because I'm speaking to a group that knows what I'm going through, and you guys can relate to this. Early on in my career, I think I was like a lot of dance music producers out there. I bought my first sampler and a drum machine, and it was very sample driven. I mean, I was taking a lot of like disco records and 80s records that I liked and cutting that up and finding little pieces and making it something of my own, you know, borrowing a lot from other places. And this is just kind of me learning the beginnings of how to work in a studio and how these machines operated and what does a digital audio workstation do. So that was the beginning for me. It was, you know, it was very much of an electronic musician's mindset or a DJ mindset, taking something and trying to make it and put my own spin on it. But as I got older and I progressed, it was like, okay, I need to think more musically and create my own niche and work on songwriting and trying to say something in these songs. And really, on this record, what differed from mostly from my records in the past, typically I've taken a block of time. I tour a lot. I do a lot of shows. You know, I don't know how many shows I've done this year, but last year it was right around 150 shows. So I'm on the road 200, 250 days out of the year. So it's very important to use these little slivers of time when I'm down or have 2 days off or 3 days off to work on music. And then I come up with little bits on the road, and I kind of have a folder of, you know, 30, 40, 50 ideas, whatever, and I sift through that, and I kind of say, hey, these are my 10 favorite little ideas that I've got going on. And then I take a couple months off and spend some time with the family and record a record and work from that kind of core group of ideas that I started on the road. This time, I didn't really ever take that time. I never really took that chunk of time off. I just used these little moments and tried to use my time more effectively. And I think it plays out on the record a little bit when you listen to it. It feels cohesive and it works, but it feels like it was made over a longer period of time, and that's true. Which is, I mean, for me, I was fine with that. I was like, 9 albums, maybe I try this way. Maybe that works better. Maybe people will appreciate that process, and maybe it'll come through in the record, and I think it did. So, yeah, that's the technical side of things. I mean, ask me anything, whatever.
Are there any particular songs on the record that have real significant sentimental meaning for you?
I think the theme of the record for me is the song We Don't Stop, which I wrote. That was one of the first songs I sat down and wrote early on in the record. And it's got 2 meanings now when I'm listening to it. Initially, I was talking about me and myself and my experience, how, you know, here I am 9 records in, almost 20 years later, and like I said earlier, it's only recently that I've really kind of come upon success, and that, you know, I sacrificed a lot of things to get to this point, and like it was always about the love of music and doing what I want to do, and having a passion for that. But then as I played it and I went out and I kind of tested it out on the road, it had a significance for me. Playing it in front of these my audiences have grown over these last 15 years from, you know, the first time I played here in Atlanta, I don't even remember the name of the bar. It was in a basement and they served licorice. They had licorice in the pop-up stand. I remember that distinctly because I love licorice, and I was like, that's an awesome idea. Everyone should do that. Anyway, it was in a basement and it was like maybe 100 people. Where tomorrow, I'll be standing in front of, I don't know, 40 or 50,000 people in a field an hour outside of Atlanta. And I think that's just kind of the theme of the record. I didn't ever intend to stop, and this scene and the people and everything that's happened around it, this explosion, you know, there's no stopping.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the collaborations on the album. My favorite track on It's Mercy, the one with Galantis. What was working with those guys like?
Really cool. Christian and Linus, the two guys that make up the band Galantis, friends of mine. I met Christian, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. I guess it was about 3 years ago now. He came over to my house. He was visiting from Sweden, and I was a huge fan of Bloodshy and what he did under that producer name. He's one of these guys that I just kind of followed. I'm like, man, this guy's always got something cool happening. He's a good songwriter, he's a good producer. What does this guy not do? Anyway, it was cool when he came over. I was like, I'm taller than you. Yes, I got one thing on you, man.
It's not that hard with him, though.
But it was just cool because I admired this guy from afar for a very long time. And I sat down with him, and we kind of just hung out and talked about his new project, Galantis. And I was familiar with Linus, who was recording and putting out music under the name Style of I. So I was a big fan of each of their individual projects, and I was just like, man, whatever you guys do together is going to be dynamite. And if there's any way I could fit in there or help you, or, you know, just let me know. I'm here for you guys, and I'm extremely interested in what you're doing. And it was just a cool moment for me because it was meeting one of the guys I really looked up to, and you know, we've been able to help each other a lot. And they sent me the beginnings of the idea for Mercy. It was a very rough sketch, and it was just music at this point. And I'd sat down and I'd written the lyrics and melody for this song, another song that's unrelated to their song. And I'm like, hey, I think we can merge these two ideas. They're not too far from one another. I feel like energy-wise, they will meld. And I sent it to him, and he's like, man, this is awesome. It's some kind of like indie rock dance thing, man. And I forget, he had some real interesting way of telling me what it was. And I was like, yes, English is not your first language, but I know what you're saying to me. I mean, his English is much better than my Swedish. So anyway, and that's really how it came together. And I retooled the music a little bit and sent it to them, and we bounced the idea back and forth a lot, actually. Christian is extremely particular. I mean, honestly, to the point where he's like, the snare needs to come up a half a dB. And I'd be like, oh, all right, cool, I hear you, man, all right. So he's very particular, and I think that's one of the, after working through this song with him and Linus, I knew why they've had so much success individually and now as a group together.
For most of the guest vocalists on the album, were you able to get into the studio with them, or was it more of a long-distance collaboration?
A bit of both. I think the one that a lot of people were happy to see me get back together with Tamara Keenan. It's been almost 8 years since I recorded Angel on My Shoulder. And we were able to get together for both songs, Where Are You Now and Tear Down These Walls, which both made the album. Yeah, my story with her is really funny. You know, I remixed a song that she wrote ages ago, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, and it did well, and it was the first song that I ever, that I was a part of that got a really big movie licensing. And it was, for me, the first time that I got to see what that does, the kind of exposure that it brings. It was in a kind of a cool key moment of The Devil Wears Prada, and they included it on the soundtrack, and I felt like all these people found my music who wouldn't necessarily find it, you know. Just because I was always speaking to like a dance music audience, and this went out to a much wider audience than that. And anyway, when I went to London to do a show, it was, we'd found out that it was going to be part of the movie, and I just looked her up. I just kind of randomly hit her up and, you know, struck up a conversation and had her come out, and we became friends, and she came out to San Francisco, and we wrote Angel on My Shoulder, and that was a huge success for me, one of kind of those moments in my career, a big breakout song. And yeah, and then we kind of went our separate ways, both leading very busy lives, and it took us 8 years, 7 years, whatever it is, to get back together. But when I announced that I was working with her again, it was great. All those people that were fans of Angel on My Shoulder got to, you know, come back and say, hey, this is great, you guys are working together. But that's one of the more memorable ones, because it was been like, I haven't seen you for 8 years. Oh my gosh, what have you been up to? She's like, I'm married and live in Los Angeles now. Oh, which made it very convenient and easy to hang out with her and record those songs.
Makes sense. How has the process of releasing an album changed, if at all, now that there's major label involvement?
It's totally different from, I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to this. It's just even from Atmosphere till now, the release process has changed quite a bit in the last 2 years. Mainly because the power of social media. I think before, when I released a record, it was hard to get any feedback. I didn't, you know, I remember when I released my first 12-inch, you know, they put it out and I went into the record label and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, we've sold 15,000 and we have another 4,000 on order. And I mean, that's the only feedback I could get, unless I was on the road touring and fans were like, oh, I love that song. But I had no interaction with the fans. And once, you know, Facebook and Twitter and MySpace and all these tools came along for me to be able to interact directly with the fans. I mean, for anyone who follows me, I interact almost on the daily. I spend a fair amount of time reaching out to my fans and talking to them directly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. You know, I feel like that's just part of what I do, sharing myself with these guys and telling them what's happening and what's coming down the line, which is a challenge because, I mean, there's a lot of noise out there, and how do you get people to pay attention to you and what you're doing? But I do my best.
Sure. Since we do have a technically savvy audience here, why don't we talk a little bit about some stuff in the studio?
Sure.
Maybe talk a little bit about what your current production setup is. You know, like what when you go to make music, where do you go first?
These days, I open up Ableton first, just because I feel like it's the quickest and easiest way to sketch an idea out. Like if I have something that's in my head, it's just really easy to open up and get something out pretty quickly. And even just for manipulating current tracks that I have, changing the arrangement and just moving stuff around, it just moves really quickly for me. And that's coming from somebody who I've been using Pro Tools for 15 years. When the Digi-001 came out, that's when I kind of made the switch from Logic to Pro Tools, because I felt like, oh, I was recording a lot of live instrumentation at the time, and the interface made a lot of sense to me. But like I was talking about before, I kind of come up with the sketches, and then I move it over to Pro Tools, and I feel comfortable in that area, in that realm. And certainly for tracking and mixing, it's all done in Pro Tools. And that's kind of just been where I'm at, which I don't know. There's not many guys in my space that are doing that. I feel like Ableton's really kind of come a long way in the last little bit. I mean, even for me, I just switched from version 8 to 9. I'm like, wow, this is a huge advance. So,
What if, like, over the years, I'm always curious to ask artists, like, what have been some of your greatest production epiphanies? Like those moments where you're like that's gonna change, I just realized then that's gonna change how I make music.
Man, there's been a lot of them. But I'll just go with something that's recent off the top of my head, which I'm sure maybe this story you'll relate to or not. For the mastering of Atmosphere, for years I had worked with the same mastering engineer, Mike Ross Kelly, an extremely talented individual, longtime friend. I mean, this guy's mastered a ton of my music. Well, all the music that I had a budget to master. If I didn't, I just threw the isotope on there and smashed it and called it a day. But Mike was mastering my records for a long time, and then I heard about stem mastering, and I was kind of thinking, this is interesting because where I'm coming from in electronic music, so much of the art of what it is sound design. There's a lot of sound design in there, so the sound is so important. So mastering is almost part of the art of what's happening. And anyway, I found Kevin Granger, this guy online, and he's doing stem mastering. He's doing a lot of dance music mastering. And he had a picture of his studio, and it's, oh man, these great compressors and EQs. I mean, just hundreds of racks of gear, right, on this wall. And I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta use this guy. I mean, the producer's always like, I gotta get that piece of gear and everything will be all right. I just gotta get that next piece, and it's always like that one piece of gear. The wives of the producers are laughing right now. My wife's like, ha 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 ha. She thinks that's funny because we can't get the car because I gotta get this. You don't understand. I gotta. Anyway, so she's lived with that for many years. Thank you, Naomi. So I flew to London. Well, I sent him a track and he mastered the track and it was beautiful. I was like, oh my gosh, man, this guy really understands what I'm going for on this record. This is incredible. So much so that I was like, I have to buy a ticket and go out there and see what you're doing. Is there any way I can sit in on the session? Typically, I've sat in on my mastering sessions. I'd like to get in there and just, watch and learn from a master, somebody who's knows and understands, has been doing this for a while. And he's like, yeah, sure, come on out. And I get in there, fly all the way to London. I get in the studio and we're having this talk and we're chatting about the record, and it's this big, huge build up to this moment when he kind of opens the session and he's looking at it, this simplified stem session. And he looks at me and he's like, so this is my process. I do everything in the box. And I probably fell out of the chair. For a few minutes, I couldn't believe what this guy was telling me, because I think you're always kind of chasing, or I'm always chasing whatever's next and this, and he was getting such an incredible sound in the box. And for me, somebody who always wants the next piece of gear that'll help my music be better or sound better, this guy had been able to do it with, a realistic set of tools, that it was his ears that were really what I was paying for. And I mean, I've always known and understood that, but it was just so real to me at that time when he's like, yes, I master everything in the box and I master in Ableton, and this is what I'm going to do. And not only that, I'll send you home with the session, with the stuff on the mastering chain, and you could check it out. And if you want to adjust something, you can. And I was just like, man, it was just a moment where, listen, every record I put out, every time I do something, it's like you get more confidence, and I've learned to believe in myself, even in the creative process, whatever. But at that moment, it was an epiphany. Like, cool, learn to use the tools that are in front of me. I don't have to have the next thing. But I mean, I've had those moments along the way. That was just a more recent one.
It's a good one, though. It's one I think a lot of people here could probably relate to.
Yeah.
What about, you have been producing for so long. How do in the box and out of the box elements coexist in your workflow?
I mean, as of late, it's just in the box is where it's at. I mean, I think that was really, listen, I mean, I think everyone wishes they could carry like their Jupiter around with them and their Juno and all this stuff and have that at their fingertips and have that. They're beautiful machines and they sound wonderful. But if you're working on a budget or on a time schedule, on a crunch, I mean, I recorded this record in a London studio, in a studio in Rio where they had almost nothing. They just had really great pre's and some nice mics. So it's like, okay, let's track vocals here, talking about using time effectively and being able to continue to progress and move and work on the record. So it was really about what's in front of me. So a lot of it's done in the box. I mean, not all of it. When I'm at home, I use what I can and just work with what's possible. But certainly in the box is much more convenient these days.
Sure. I think one thing that's really impressive about your career is that you've managed to allow your sound to evolve and made different kinds of music without really sort of losing any popularity. If anything, it's almost helped your career by being able to reach new audiences. But I think for a lot of producers, it's a little bit daunting to depart from a style that they feel is working. What sort of advice would you have for producers coming up who might feel that way?
Okay, and this is a long answer, but it's a good one. And it's something that I think you guys will relate to, or I hope that you will. And maybe you've already experienced this. For me, when I moved to San Francisco in the year 2000, and in San Francisco, electronic music was kind of having a boom. Naked Music, Home Records, Solstice was a great band that was kind of like this new soul, but very electronic sounding, Sneaker Pimps. There's all these things kind of happening around that time. And up until that moment for me, house music or dance music was very like program and sound design oriented. That's kind of where my head was at. But when I heard Solstice and I heard these bands, Sneaker Pimps, and I heard this stuff that was going out, Moby was kind of having a moment, and I was like, wow, it's not so much about the sound design. That's cool. People want the music to be sonically interesting, but more importantly, I think if I could focus on songwriting, then, if I can write a piece of music, if I can write lyrics and a melody that will stick with people, I could produce it any number of ways, and it'll last, because those lyrics will have meaning to somebody. And really, I started focusing more on songwriting, and that's kind of when my career took a change. And that's when I started recording under the name Kaskade. I was like, okay, this is going to be lyric and melody driven music. Like, cool, sure, it's always rooted in house music because that's what I love, that's where I come from, and that'll be the foundation. But I want to write songs that have meaning. So I started out with that, and it's interesting. I mean, even today when I play "It's You, It's Me" at a show, people hands up, and my older fans like cheer, like, yes, he's playing a classic, and they love it. Or somebody will show me their arm where they have the lyrics tattooed on them, or their midriff, or whatever they do. They're like, hey, check it out, man! Oh, wow. And it's cool because I can go back and revisit these songs, and I can always remix them and make them sound current or mash them up. I mean, this is something that I started doing years ago when I wanted to play old songs, but I wanted them sonically to sound very current. I'm like, oh man, I could take this a cappella and put it over this new track because it doesn't have any vocals on it. In dance music, I mean, I'd say the majority, 95% of the music's instrumental based. It's very rhythm based music. So I could always take these old songs of mine and make them new. And people are still relating to those words. And I think it's a place that I've stood that's been a very unique and different place, and something that set me apart from everybody else. Because it's like, wow, if I focus on this, no matter what genre is hot today, like whatever, trap was cool last year, this year, techno's hot. It's like, to me, it doesn't really matter. Find the stuff the sounds that you like, but more importantly, write a song that says something or that shares a piece of you, and that's what's going to stick.
In a way, that seems also ahead of its time in dance and electronic music. So many of the artists I speak to now are speaking about like a renewed focus. I'm going to focus on songwriting now. Why do you think it's just that like artists are kind of understanding that now? Or do you think that maybe the climate is poised for people to break through more? But I keep hearing everyone talking more about, songwriting is like the buzzword.
I'm not familiar with that conversation. I'd like to think that's I've had success and people are looking at me and thinking like, man, that guy he's doing whatever, but he's writing cool songs that I can relate to. I think it's me and a handful of guys that have been out there kind of like leading that charge. I think that's certainly a part of it. But I think the other part of it is that dance music, much of it's crossed over, and there is that potential to go to the radio if you have a strong song. But I don't think that's going to make or break people's career. I've never had a song on the radio, and it just never hurt my touring career. So I've been able to find an audience just by speaking directly to them. But I think that motivation is certainly there as people kind of look at dance music and try and take it apart and say what's working. Hey, there's money being made here. How can we just put this together? I think a lot of producers right now, dance music producers, are being signed by labels because top line writing is such a big deal right now. It's like, hey, we have all these great songs. If we could just sign one of these dudes to produce this stuff, then we can just shove it through our system. So it's an interesting time in dance music because I feel like some of the authenticity right now is kind of being questioned, and people are like, hey, what am I really listening to here? But whatever, to me, the cream always rises and the good music finds its way out there. But it's cool that kind of discussion's happening and people are focusing more on songs, because when we serviced my first record, It's You, It's Me, everyone was like, record's pretty cool, but could you guys send the instrumental versions? Because all this garbage with the vocals, man, this is crazy. Honestly, we had a lot of people sending that feedback, like, yeah, the tracks are cool, man, get rid of the vocals. So that was a real thing. So it's been a long road getting to this point.
Do you feel as though most fans of dance music understand the different skill sets between like DJing and producing?
Listen, I like to think that most people know the difference, but in reality, probably not. And does it really matter? I don't, it's hard to say. I think when I play a remix that I did and somebody's like, hey, your song's so awesome, I'm like, well, I actually just remixed that song, it's not me. I think that's always been a point of confusion in electronic music. I can remember early on in my career, Tiesto was playing one of my songs, and he played on his radio show, and I'd go to the YouTube page, and there was something like 3 or 4 million listens, and it's listed as his song, and I kept going on. For months, I literally was like, that's my song. And I would, artist, Kaskade, title, and I would kept correcting these people. It didn't matter how many times I corrected them, and I kind of became comfortable with that. I was like, okay, it's great that this guy played it for a lot of people, and that helped bring fans, the fans that were clued in to me. But I think ultimately, like, the passive fan just wants to go out and have a good time and enjoy some good music. The active fan, with the people that I'm more interested in, they do know these subtle differences, It's kind of like when you go to a show and it's like a little bit quiet, or you don't know exactly what's wrong. It's not totally where the lights aren't that good or the volume wasn't. You're like, man, it just didn't really hit me. That same band could play the next night in a venue that really works, and you could see the same show and be like, I was blown away. Well, they played the same set. It's just a different set of circumstances. So I don't know. I like to think that most people understand that, but I'm not sure that they all do. But is that the end of the world? At least they're listening,
Who have been some of your favorite artists to collaborate with?
I gotta say, Late Night Alumni, a band that I started years ago and don't play much of a role in it these days because my project took off, but still some of the coolest people that I work with. Galantis is at the top of the list. Skylar Gray, still to this day, one of the coolest people that I've hung out with in the studio. Just truly an incredible songwriter. Not only does she nail it live, her voice is just unbelievable, and that's why I reached out to her. But then when I hung out with her and saw what an amazing person and songwriter she is, it just, made the songs that much more special to me. Who else? I mean, on this album, Sid is another guy that really kind of an unknown at this point, is kind of bubbling in the underground right now. People are starting to pay attention, but extremely talented guy. He would send me records, and I kept playing everything he'd send me. I'm like, man, you're really batting 1,000%. You're great. And then when it came to do the record, I'm like, hey, do you have any free time? He's like, are you kidding? I'll drop everything. So it was a pleasure to collaborate with him.
I know even before your artist career took off, you worked as an A&R for Ohm Records previously. Do you still sort of have an ear to the ground? Are there any scenes or sounds that are really exciting you right now?
Yeah, I mean, mainly I've got my small little imprint that I've started, I don't know, a little while back, Arcade, and I'm constantly being sent stuff. I think what's interesting now is the accessibility of everything. I mean, when I got into it, I saved for a very long time to buy my first sampler, to buy my first drum machine, to buy my first Mac 7100 with a new bus card in there that ran 4 tracks of audio. This is a huge deal for me. And it was very expensive. My first set of turntables, all this stuff cost a lot of money, and I worked really hard to do it. To get that, I feel like now, I mean, the first time I met Martin Garrix, I was out at Tomorrowland, and Animals had only been out like a month or something. It was just brand new, this kid. I think he was 16 or 17 at the time. He had his hair. I mean, I'm like, where are your parents at? This is crazy. Anyway, he was very appreciative, and I just kind of was like, how did you get into this? And oh man, I'm taking this class. He was at a production school, and this was one of his assignments to write a song. So it was early on in his career that he wrote a song that went, platinum. I don't even know how many times over in how many countries, but he's 17 years old, 16 years old when he did this, living at his parents' house. And I just think that story, after meeting him, and I'm sitting in the car driving back to the hotel thinking, I mean, that might have been on his dad's laptop for all I know. He didn't need, and it wasn't even anything that was overly complicated, but it was a really neat and fun idea, and I understood why it worked. But I think that's just changed everything, for good and for bad. but I like to focus on the good reasons, giving people with ideas a chance to be able to make them.
Do you feel as though the current climate has also empowered producers compared to where producers were prior to the advent and accessibility of digital technology?
Yeah, I just think it's changed everything. I mean, empowered them, from the entry level used to be just so much more difficult and so much more expensive for people to get into this, and now anyone can. If there's a will, there's a way. You'll be able to find a computer that can run some tracks of audio and whatever, maybe a crummy mic is part of your sound and it works. I mean, I'm playing that Rufus song right now, and the vocal, to me as a producer, I'm like, this thing sounds terrible, but it works so awesome. It sounds beautiful. It's terribly awesome. I love it. So, I mean, that became part of his sound,
And not to focus on the negative, but if there was one thing you could change about the scene, what would it be?
Some of the stereotypes that are out there, that we're all like these drug-fueled kids out there. I think sometimes the press that electronic music gets is, it's unfortunate, because for me, as a kid and as somebody who discovered it very early on, it was a refuge. It was a place where I went to be myself. And the fact that I didn't do drugs and that I was a little bit different didn't bother anybody. That was part of it. Hey, we're all a little bit odd here. Let's hang out and listen to some dance records and bounce around. It was a very open environment. And I think that side of things gets left out for some of the negative stories that happen to come out. And we kind of all get thrown in that bunch, when I feel like overall it's a really great community of people that are quite accepting and open.
I recently.
All right.
So I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Jean-Michel Jarre, and the thing that he said that stuck out the most to me was that people still think that electronic music is a genre when it's actually just a new way of composing music. And
oh man, nailed it.
I
mean, that's when people are like electronic music. I'm like, what? Are we just going to call everything that now? I mean, we're all working in the box. I mean, you know, there's so much going on. I mean, really, the digital workstation changed everything and how we think of it. So yeah, I mean, pop music. I think all the lines are blurred now, which is kind of cool. I think it's a very interesting and very open time for people to be, doing and creating or whatever. There's the lines are blurred.
In light of that, do you have feelings on like the term EDM and where like how people can refer to this in a more accurate and all-encompassing way?
Oh man, I wish I could think of that word, because it would be really cool to be the guy that coins that term. But I'm not that guy. I guess I'm not that clever. I think right now electronic dance music, EDM, kind of has a negative connotation and stands for like a subgenre of what electronic music is, which is unfortunate, because to me it was kind of a convenient name to kind of encompass everything. But yeah, it seems to me now that it has this weird connotation. So I always call it house music because that's what it is to me. But then I started calling it electronic music because it seems to be more open and people are understanding of that. Yeah, the term EDM, I don't use that much more these days because it seems to refer to a very specific kind of high energy sound that doesn't necessarily encompass everything that's going on out there. There's a lot of facets. I think what's important to note that, I mean, this style of music and what's been happening has been cooking in the underground for a couple decades. I mean, we're talking post-disco, early 80s. This was like right post-disco, right? We were cutting up these records and taking 2-inch tape and rearranging them and put kick drums under, and then it kind of graduated to, and matured, and it took a very long time to get to where it is now. But there's a long, rich history, and I mean, it's hard to just put one thing on it. But I mean, we're trying, and you know what? The important thing is that people are just talking about it and that more people are listening to it. To me, it's still a victory that, 50,000 people will be there tomorrow. It's still unbelievable. I mean, really, from the basements and the pizza parlors to huge open fields outside of Atlanta. So it's cool for me that they're talking about it at all. Yeah.
As someone who came up in the States and a time before there was this interest and popularity, is it something you thought would happen? Is it something that you thought was like a foregone conclusion, or does it surprise you? So?
Honestly, not to this size and scale. Nah, not really. I mean, I listen, I knew dance music would have its time. Because, I mean, look, people like evolution, they like change, they like fresh sounds, and, you continue to go through things. I knew people would eventually end up here because I loved it, and I was like, man, if I like it, other people could like it too. It just needs to get in their ears. So I knew we'd have a moment, but I mean, nothing like this. This industry is responsible for billions of dollars right now, and it's just huge. I mean, Electric Daisy Carnival, what is it, 500,000 people over 3 days? I mean, it's just crazy to think that it's grown from the basements to where it is now. And honestly, I'm not totally sure where it's going. And now that it's come this far, and I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I think 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, okay, yeah, we're going all the way with this. But I feel like now we've just kind of scratched the surface. The stuff that's broken through has been electronic music that was more wrapped in a pop package. It was kind of like pseudo pop that was dance oriented. And I think people have discovered that, and like their ears have got used to it, and they're acclimated now that a lot of this cooler stuff that's bubbling underground is going to surface and poke through, and I think it's going to be a really cool and fun time. I mean, I think Disclosure was the first record where I was like, yes, man, this is awesome. I can get with this music right now, and this is on the radio. This is crazy. So I think this is, the beginnings of kind of what's next, and who knows where it's going to go from here.
Well, on that note, we have some fan submitted questions from the audience.
Awesome.
So we can.
Great. We'll keep it short. Am I talking too
Yeah.
long, man?
How we
Sorry,
doing,
guys. Yeah, we're bad. We'll keep it short. Maybe pick the best couple, you guys.
Let's see.
I like to talk. Sorry.
Well, this is a good one here. As a person who works out of the music industry with a stable income, a stable life, but wants to take a leap into the unstable life of an artist or DJ, what advice would you offer me?
I mean, good luck is what I would say, you need that. I think for me, part of the reason it worked is because I had no plan B. I didn't have well, if it doesn't work out, I'll be an architect or I'll go sell insurance. I just was like, no matter what, do or die, man, I am doing music. I'm gonna sit in this studio until I make it work, and I'm gonna go on the road and I'll play for cheeseburgers, I'll play for Ritz crackers, I don't care, I'm gonna do that. And fortunately, listen, I mean, that's a very, very small part of the story. I had my wife, Naomi, who supported me all the way and lived through that and was there for me and lifted me up and helped me make it through those really tough times. But and a manager who found me 12 years ago who believed in that, and Stephanie LaFera has been by my side almost this entire way. So I had incredible people there that were by my side that believed in me. And more importantly, I think that, or equally as important, definitely not more important, but I had, I had a dream and I had a desire and I had passion for this, but the driving factor was never to be rich or famous. I think for me, the first time I paid my rent and had another month's rent in the bank, I was like, I've made it. Oh my gosh. I'm making a living making music. This is incredible. We're gonna be okay. We can go out to dinner tonight. So that was really in my intention. I just wanted to be able to take care of my family, and that's really what was important to me. I mean, everything else kind of came later, and that was never the end goal. The end goal was to satisfy the need to create and write. So good luck, man. I wish you luck.
We'll do one more.
Yeah.
Don't Stop Dancing Girl is one of the craziest records I've ever heard. Can you briefly explain the creative process behind it?
Oh, thank you. Wow, that's very nice of you. For me, that's a very light record. I was working on Dynasty, and I was just like, I need a record that. Sometimes I overthink these things. I'm like, oh, what am I writing about? I must stop world hunger, And I mean, really, at the end of the day, I'm just making disco records to have a fun time. So Don't Stop Dancing Girl to me was just like a call out to all these beautiful ladies that came to my shows and were there and paying and going and buying my records. I was like, don't stop dancing. I mean, the concept was very easy. And once I wrote the song, I reached out to EDX. He co-produced the song with me. He's a great producer, great guy, Maurizio. And I reached out to him. I said, hey, do you have any ideas? This is kind of the direction I want to take it. And yeah, we finished the song together. And I'm glad a lot of people like that one. Yeah, it's cool that it poked through and that something so fun and just light and frivolous could be a call to go out, have a good time. You don't have to stop dancing. Don't be bothered with the cares of the world. I think that message is a simple one, but people can relate.
Everyone, let's give it up for Kaskade. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.